we can actually have a debate about who is the White Sox best hitter this season. I'm going with
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan. I've been podcasting here for over a year and a half and covering the team well before then. And also I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Colson Montgomery, Kyle Teel, and Edgar Kerr would be my nominees for being the team's best hitter this season. And I'll discuss which one I would go with in the first segment. Then I want to add why the timing was perfect to let Ethan Katz and Marcus Thames go. And finally, a sort of way back Wednesdays, I do want to reflect on what could have been had the team kept Garrett Crochet after watching him dominate the Yankees in the wild card series last night. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. So I'm actually going to go with power breaking the tie as who I thought ended up being the team's best hitter this season. And that means I'm going with Colson Montgomery over Kyle Teel. Now, I know Teal had the better slash line, but the ideal lineup will always need power for the Chicago White Sox. The Chicago White Sox should always be a power team so long as they play at right field. And then if they ever move to a new stadium, then you just got to depend on where they're going to be. If you're at the the Michael Reese site, which is closer to the lake, maybe you got to mix it in, kind of do what the Cubs have done. But usually the wind is not blowing in as much as it does at Wrigley. So you should be a power team because the ball carries really well at right field. And Montgomery, provided that he is going to be a major power hitter in a small sample size of 71 games. However, I'll feed you baby birds chirping for thinking Teal was the better hitter, as I do think Teal will eventually become the team's best overall hitter because he does have a little bit of a better hit tool in terms of bat-to-ball skills, and he has the potential to provide some pop. So he can do basically a jack of all trades. But when you look at their sample sizes, they're pretty much similar. I'm just going to defer to Colson Montgomery providing more instant offense. And the eye test obviously showed that Colson is going to mostly hit home runs or strike out. But at the end of the season, he was starting to give hints that, he could probably mix in a lot more doubles. So his average won't be as bad as maybe some are anticipating. And I think he can provide that value as a hitter just as much as Teal has. And if you look at their value numbers, Montgomery's got actually some better value numbers. Now, coming in third would be Caro, based on, I'm going to say, his struggles to hit in crunch time and the lack of slug. He does need to add that back into his repertoire next season. Now, before we get into the disagreement stage, let's just hopefully all agree. It's actually nice for once that we can compare good players with each other on the White Sox roster. We can actually have these fun debates rather than discuss, hey, who's worse than this guy? Because we did not have that in the 2024 offseason, heading into the 2025 offseason. When I was doing these types of shows, these wrap-up shows, it was basically like, hey, they don't have anybody in the lineup that they can move forward with. And they didn't. Now you've got options. I mean, there could be somebody out there that could actually even make a case, hey, Lenyn Sosa, hitting 22 home runs, having a decent average and a decent slug. You could make a case for that. Miguel Vargas' stretch, from May to June, where he looked like an all-star, and then at least showed that he was a race floor player. Now, obviously, overall hitting 230 does not make him the team's best hitter, but he showed that maybe there's some potential there. But we can actually have the debate. We can actually have the discussion. You can put this in the comments like, hey, I think Kyle Teel was the best hitter, X, Y, and Z. And you know what? We can actually have some fun doing it. Or, what we can also do is say, hey, let's just enjoy all three. We can finally have that. Now, when you're saying, though, Todd, you're wrong when it comes to Colson, well, it's hard to argue with 21 home runs, a 529 slug, a 355 weighted on base average, and a 129 WRC plus that Colson put up in 71 games compared to Teal's 8 dingers, 411 slug, a .344 weighted on base average, and 125 WRC plus. Although, again, maybe you can debate it because the difference in the hit profile was walk percentage, as Teal was 12.5% to Colson's 8.8%. And both had strikeout percentages over 25%. So if you're going to go like, hey, I prefer, guys that basically put the ball in play a little bit more. Teal did that obviously a lot better. His strikeout percentage was, I believe, around 25.8, where Colson was at 29.8. So you kind of have that deciding factor too. And if clutch stats is obviously your deciding factor, well, then obviously it's Teal who should win White Sox Hitter of the Year. And I talked about it on previous shows how he became Mr. Clutch. But if WAR is how you're going to split hairs, Colson was at 2.7 overall F4 to Teal's 1.9. And in a lot of ways, Colson's F4 is propped up by the offense he provided, crushing those home runs. But the thing is that's great is, think about it, both barely played this season and have already given glimpses into how they're going to raise the team's talent level. And I think we should all root for these two turning into superstars. And that's the thing, that they're going to raise that talent level to where they could have potential superstar players. I mean, again, for me, for Kyle Teel, the bar that he has to now clear is he going to be an all-star catcher or actually a superstar player, kind of like Cal Riley? Now, I don't see him hitting 60 home runs, but I could see him maybe hitting 280, 290, which in today's day and age might be a batting title. Although, again, I'm going to go way out on a limb. You know who should be the batting champion? Whoever has the best average with runners in scoring position, because that's when average matters. And I'll get to that in a second. But, when you look at Kyle Teel, I could see him hit 20, 25 bombs. Maybe I'm being generous because I know some have said 15 to 20, but I could see him hitting 20 to 25 home runs, driving in 100 runs, that type of stuff. I could see him potentially, the highest of the highest ceilings that you want to see is, could he be a guy that competes for an MVP? I doubt it because he plays catcher, and catchers usually don't win the MVP. But those are the things that you want to look at. Now, Colson definitely has superstar written all over him, as long as he can, hit in that 240 to 270 range. But still, if he's crushing 40 home runs, I mean, he was projected to hit 48 home runs this year. Think about it. And think about this, too, in terms of the raised talent floor now that the White Sox have. The Sox had 7 hitters with an F4 at 1.3 or above. Last year, they had 1 hitter that had an F4 above 1. And it was Paul DeYoung's 1.1 number, and he was traded at the trade deadline. He didn't even play on the team in August and September. And I will say this, if Carroll wants to start competing for top hitter status, because I like his bat-to-ball skills, the power has to arrive. He's got to start hitting more home runs, and he's got to hit better with runners in scoring position. That has to improve immensely. And I know I went over that in previous episodes, so go back and check on that. And he needs to also raise, those things need to be done to help raise his F4, because he was a minus 0.2 F4 and a 95 WRC plus. So that should help him obviously increase those value numbers. Now, before you jump into the comments about Colson hitting 239 in 71 games, 3 things, again, you got to take into account. The goal is now to do damage at the plate, hit the ball hard, barrel it up. And Colson had a 14.5 barrel rate, along with a 44.5% hard hitting percentage, compared to Teal's 9.6 barrel percentage and 37.6 hard hit percentage. Second, I've said it, hitting with runners in scoring position is the average that should matter, as who cares if you get on base with a single or a walk with nobody on? You just got to get on base. That's what matters. That's why average hasn't become, decreased in status. Hitting a homer, double, or triple is also better than getting a single with nobody on base. That's why you want to do damage. So that's why there's been that pivot to slash line or OPS. However, getting a hit to drive in a run, just get a hit of any variety. And Colson does need to grow there with a 213 average. But when it comes to his average, his splits, 266 over the past 30 days, 326 past 15 games, 417 over his final 7 games. So that's showing me that there's a guy that's trying to figure out, hey, I can hit more than just home runs. And he's getting better. And getting better in the offseason is one way the White Sox will climb up in the standings. And I feel the team picked the right time to move on from Ethan Katz and Marcus Thames, because improvement is basically phase 2 of the rebuild. And I want to discuss that after the break. There's nothing like catching a baseball game live. The energy, the crowd, the chance to see your team in person. But actually getting tickets, That's the tough part. Queues, login screens, surprise fees. It takes all the fun out of it. That's why I use Game Time, the app that gives the advantage back to fans. Game Time is fast, easy, and backed by the Game Time guarantee. You'll always get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time and at the best price. Plus, all fees are included. So the price you see is the price you pay. Think about it. Fees are included when you're searching for tickets. So you're going to know your total upfront without those surprise fees at checkout. And how many times you thought, hey, I am getting a great deal for this game, for this show, only to get to the checkout and see that deal just vanished under a pile of fees. That doesn't happen at Game Time. Honestly, Game Time is faster, cheaper, and less stressful than any other way I've bought tickets. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go, download Game Time today. And most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. And that's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. And if you put off organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. And I like using Monarch when it comes to managing my 401k and Roth IRA accounts. Monarch has helped me notice an inefficient investment allocation and discovered a forgotten 401k I had from a past job. And my wife loves Monarch Money because it makes doing the budget so easy and less stressful. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONMLB. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, make sure to hit the like button on today's episode. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox. And if you can't catch the show on YouTube, you can get the audio version of the show on places such as Apple or Spotify. So make sure to follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Either way, get your 30-minute fix of Chicago White Sox baseball venting with me and maybe some hope. And also make sure to check out my written content. It's going to be at SouthsideSox.com, on Tap Sportsnet, and at Fans First Sports Network. I have made a decision in terms of some side hustles to go with those sites. I'm leaving fan-sided, at least the SouthsideShowdown.com. I put in the notice. I basically got some offers to branch out, and I want to do that. So I hope you take in that content. I really am looking forward to joining Brett's crew at SouthsideSox.com and the Fans First Sports Network. I'm very excited to do that. So I hope you check out that content. All right, folks, you finally got to see pitching coach Ethan Katz and hitting coach Marcus Thames purged from the organization. And while I would love to pile on owner Jerry Reinsdorf for likely not authorizing their dismissals last year, because I had the question of like, why didn't Will get the chance to hire his own guys when he was first hired last offseason? And I'm just going to speculate, kicking around like, Katz and like Thames probably had a year left on their deal. And Jerry, he doesn't like to pay people to do nothing. And also, the reason why I'm not going to pile on, though, is this was actually the right time to move on from those two. And I briefly said it yesterday when I was talking with Kyle Williams of the Chicago Sun-Times, but this season was all about finding out if any of the young players at or near the major league level could be core players. And mission accomplished. Now it's on to phase 2. Get those players better. And by having, Colson and Teal and Edgar Caro, being under the supervision, the hitting supervision of Marcus Thames for 1 year, I don't think it's going to hurt their careers. Or Shane Smith working with Ethan Katz this year wasn't going to wasn't going to kill his career. But I could see it. I could see them having some issues long term. It was hard for me to see Katz and Thames helping this team, helping these guys get better if they were still in the organization long term. And honestly, I've never had a problem with Katz as a pitching coach. I know there are some of you that are very vehemently opposed to Katz. I thought he did okay. I agree. I never really bought into the hype. Like, wow, Lucas Giolito, he and the Westlake guys, he was manufacturing pitchers into the draft, and it's great that we added it. And then we saw it and it was like, well, okay. And actually, Lucas Giolito got worse once, they started inspecting gloves. At least that's speculation. And Lucas Giolito's gone. So it's like, why are we keeping Katz around? But I think he was okay. I don't think he was terrible. I don't think he was this genius like people think. And when it comes to the hitting coach, I think way too much weight is put on the hitting coach when things are going bad at the plate. Because most hitters kind of have said they are what they are. And all you can do is maybe do some tinkering. And especially in the White Sox case, they brought in Ryan Fuller to be the organization's hitting director. So that kind of sort of decreased Thames' impact on the hitting. However, process-wise, I could see, wanting to get him out because I believe the hitting coach at the major league level should be responsible for making sure every hitter is prepared to take on every game. They know everything about the pitchers that they need. And there were definitely times in 2024 where they looked completely unprepared and overmatched. And this season, they particularly struggled to hit fastballs during the first half of the season. Getting overpowered like that should not happen. I think the moment, Will Venable said the second half goal should be to hit heat better, Marcus's days were numbered. And I think both were numbered in that I will say, again, it's hard to be confident that those two could help this young core get better. And remember, GM Chris Getz hinted where the team is going to get improvement in the offseason is by work, by these young guys working in the offseason and spring training. So internal improvement, everyone, while not headline worthy, that is part of the next phase of a rebuild. And I, for one, agree with Getz and Venable saying, let's get some other guys now in here to coach these guys up at the pitching and hitting level at the big league level. And in the case of Getz, I do want to zero in on two areas as to why I think a new voice was needed for the pitching staff. And, Kyle was on the show yesterday and he said he was a bit surprised Katz was let go given how well he worked with the bullpen pitchers. And it sounded, it always sounded like him and pitching director Brian Bannister did work well together. But the team, and the other thing is too, like you could make a case, well, the team's ERA decreased from 4.90 in 2023 to 4.67 in 2024 to 4.24 this season. Sleeper White Sox on Twitter had that out. But if Katz works so well with the relievers, the team was still terrible in high leverage situations. And some of that's talent, but still the fifth worst ERA in crunch time at 10.52. And when you fail in those situations, that costs you wins. And we saw the White Sox lose a lot of close games this season because the bullpen could not, protect these leads. And while the ERA decrease is nice, it could have been because, maybe Chris Getz put the focus on maybe getting some better defensive players. In 2023, you had Tim Anderson's terrible defense. As much as I love TA, he was a terrible defensive shortstop. You didn't have that in 2024 and 2025. You actually had a little bit better defense. And then the other thing is the command issues were just glaring this season. The team was 29th in walks allowed. And when you're using weak contact and funky deliveries to make up for the lack of strikeout pitchers, you can't have that big of command issues. And while Bannister has described himself as basically the equivalent of a golf swing coach, to a pro golfer, basically then the mechanics guys, process-wise guy, that type of thing, Katz should still be the fallback to help out in case maybe what Bannister suggests isn't working. And in one way, I think it worked one time in one instance, but for the most part, never heard like, hey, Ethan Katz came up with this solution. And plus, Bannister is in charge of pitching for the entire organization. And Katz should then just be around for the day-to-day stuff at the big league level. And you saw key guys actually getting worse as the season wore on. Now, some of that was stamina, but Jonathan Cannon pitched a good chunk of innings last year, and his stuff got worse as the season went on this year. Sean Burke struggled with his command all season long. So I think it's time to give Venable his guys to get this team to improve. Although you got to wonder, how safe would have Katz's job been had the team not traded Garrett Crochet? And I sort of want to do a way back Wednesday to discuss a few what ifs when it comes to Garrett Crochet after the break. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. FanDuel gives you so many ways to play. You can build parlays, you can try player props, and even follow the live lines during the games. And I've always been telling you, FanDuel's traditional money lines, over-unders, and spreads, they are fun to play. But if you want to win big money or at least double or triple your cash, play the parlays, the props, or the futures. And they're running a same-game parlay for tomorrow night's San Francisco and Los Angeles game with Kyron Williams, Christian McCaffrey, Puka Nacua, and Devontae Adams all scoring an anytime touchdown. And last time I checked, it was at plus 1453. Again, that's plus 1453. And if you put $10 on that and it hits, that pays out $145.36. And FanDuel makes watching football even more exciting when you've got a little something riding on the action. So are you ready? So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com today to download the FanDuel app and get started. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, shout out to all the everydayers. I appreciate your loyalty. Please hit the like button on today's episode. Recommend to your fellow Sox fans or baseball fans, friends, to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox, wherever they get their podcasts, as this show's available on all major podcast platforms. So Garrett Crochet was brilliant last night in Boston's 3-1 victory over the Yankees in Game 1 of their wild card series. I mean, he was just dominant over 7 2/3 innings. I believe he retired like 17 straight batters. And he was so dominant, I think he would have gotten Bucky Dent out. I mean, if you would have traveled back in time to that, tie-breaking game where Red Sox fans have forever cursed out Bucky Dent until 2004, I think Garrett Crochet gets that guy out. And watching him dominate for the Red Sox, in a way, made me wonder what could have been in two instances. What could have been had Crochet not exited Game 3 of the wild card series in 2020, and what could have been even this season had the club decided, you know what, let's pay him the extension that the Red Sox gave him. Because I don't want to relitigate the trade, as I think it's trending towards both teams mutually benefiting. And it's good process in that you took an asset like Garrett Crochet and quadrupled them into other assets. I mean, you got basically 3 big league players and another one that's your top prospect that could potentially be your superstar. But there's still obviously some bars that the White Sox still need to clear on the deal to make sure it's definitely mutually beneficial. One, that it doesn't turn into another Yohan Moncada, Michael Kopech type return. But, another is the deal, Teal and Brandon Montgomery actually reach superstar status. Wickham Gonzalez becomes a viable bullpen arm in high leverage situations. And Chase Meidroth proves, he's a legit everyday second baseman in that old school Moneyball mode of, he can get on base and he can hit the ball where they ain't. Because, there's still some skepticism on whether he's actually a legit everyday player or he's just a utility player. I mean, either way, he's going to have a big league career with that hit profile and a decent glove. It's just, can he sustain and become a value player, because he just doesn't have a ton of pop. He's probably going to hit maybe 5 to 10 home runs. He's never going to, if he's going to be, that 750 OPS guy, he's going to have a high on base percentage, for example, to make it up, and in that type of end. And also, I know Sean Anderson of CHGO White Sox podcast, formerly hosted this show. I remember, listening where he pointed out, Meidroth's very good at hitting the ball where they ain't. But if you make, if the defense makes those adjustments, he's going to then have to adjust back. So that's just kind of what it's seeing. And also, you kind of want to see the trade reach the status where the Red Sox would miss having Teal and Brandon Montgomery. I don't think that's going to happen just because, again, the Red Sox built up this massive war chest of prospects, and they've done a good job of infusing talent, and they can just go out and spend and get whoever they want now. But you would like them to be like, man, be nice to have Kyle Teel, that type of stuff. And you could say, well, for those that are in the pro, Crochet should have stayed camp. And again, I was always advocating that they should have kept Crochet. I understood why they traded him. I didn't like why they traded him, though. The reason I'll get to in a second. But you kind of have some guys that make you miss Garrett Crochet a little less. I mean, Shane Smith stepped up to fill that stud pitcher role Crochet developed into last season. Now Smith has to just build up the endurance to, pitch consistently through an entire season to replace Crochet as the staff's ace. Because again, there's a difference between a stud pitcher and an ace pitcher. Stud pitcher has that stuff where you're like, that's awesome. Love watching it. It's on Pitching Ninja. But they got to be able to do it consistently. And we saw Shane Smith kind of run out of gas in July. So he's got to, show that he can sustain solid, great performances through the entire season. And, the other reason why you can't really miss Crochet too much is you've got 3 players that already got to the big league level. 2 of them made major contributions. One gave glimpses that he could potentially give some, contributions where you need it, high leverage situations. So that's why you don't completely regret, obviously, trading Garrett Crochet. It's one of those things where 2 things can be true at once. You can actually love the trade because you got a good return. You followed a good process and basically taking one guy and turning him into 4 potential good players with 2 that have superstar potential. But on the flip side, you can still hate the trade because one of the reasons why he was traded was the club control was going to run out before the team got competitive. Ryan McGuffey of the Recap podcast, I remember him always saying it when I'd listen, 2 ships passing in the night. Because Crochet was set to be a free agent after next season. And the team was not going to extend him. You did not have the club control anymore. And the organization was never going to pay him the big time extension that he got from the Boston Red Sox. And that is one of the reasons why the White Sox had to trade him. I get you can't have a top pitcher like Garrett Crochet on such a bad team. Well, yeah, you can. Gotta have guys that you can move forward with. Guys that are in their mid-20s that you drafted in the first round. I get he pitches every 5 days. But since you didn't have the club control, you had to sell high and multiply the asset. But again, 2 things could have been true. You could have still kept Garrett Crochet had you extended and tried to extend him and pay him the money because you still had Edgar Carroll, a catcher, in your system. You still had Lenine Sosa's bat, at least at second base. You didn't know how good it was going to be. But he's still there. And yes, I get he has terrible defense. I mean, you still had some pass. Obviously, again, 2 things can be true. But if the deal keeps trending towards being mutually beneficial, it's okay for Crochet to be pitching the Red Sox to playoff success and likely finishing runner-up in the Cy Young race, as probably in the long run, we'll look back at this and say, yeah, the rebuild likely needed these 4 pieces just as much as it would have needed an ace pitcher. Plus, you still have some options in your system to fill Crochet's void. I mean, you had options. But the void I will always wonder about is if Crochet doesn't exit that deciding Game 3 against Oakland in the 2020 Wild Card Series, when he exits in the bottom of the second. Because remember, that is when manager Ricky Renteria panicked, and things get all out of whack because that was a bullpen game. The decision was made that Dane Dunning was going to be an opener, and they're bullpenning it. And Ricky just freaked out. And let's say Crochet doesn't exit after 9 pitches. He had 7 pitches for strikes. He was throwing darts. So maybe he picks up another inning or 2. And he's throwing strikes. Well, then that team doesn't have 9 walks because that's what it really came down to. Just too many walks were given up in the deciding game. When you give up 9 walks, including Evan Marshall's 2 costly free passes in the 5th inning that led to the bases loaded, led to the bases getting loaded and Pinder hitting that game-breaking 2 RBI single, that's why they lost that series. You just can't allow that many base runners in the deciding game and expect to win. Well, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day. For your second listen, check out Locked On MLB Game Night. Every game, every night until a World Series champion is crowned. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find MLB Game Night on Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. And I'll be back tomorrow with your mailbag questions and comments. Feel free to leave comments about today's discussion on the episode page on YouTube via email, lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com, or leave them at X, formerly Twitter, at LockedOnSox or at Todd J. Dub. Also, make sure to like today's episode on YouTube and leave a 5-star review at wherever you get your podcast. Have a great day, and I will talk to you tomorrow.